He smirked like a man holding a card he thought I couldn't possibly see coming, some private, smug little advantage over me. I closed the door gently, my hands steadier than they had any right to be in that strange, tense moment on the porch. 5 years earlier, my ex-wife Renee had quietly walked out of our marriage on a gray, rainy Tuesday afternoon in mid-October. "You're married to your job," she told me once, "to a courtroom full of strangers, filing motions long after midnight, instead of to your own family who's waiting here for you," she said. I had been a family court judge back then, spending long days deciding custody cases, my nights buried under stacks of case files. Looking back, I think we both stopped fighting for the marriage long before either of us said the word divorce out loud. There was no single dramatic betrayal, just a slow accumulation of missed dinners, unspoken resentments, and two people quietly growing into strangers. I've since learned that's how most marriages actually end, not with fireworks, but with silence nobody notices building until it's far too late. I hadn't noticed the slow drift, the way Renee stopped waiting up for me, stopped asking how my endless days actually went. When she left, she took the good couch and half our photo albums, leaving me only the quiet and two frightened, small children. Renee said I brought the courtroom home with me, weighing every family dinner like evidence, every silence like something needing careful cross-examination. She wasn't entirely wrong, I'll admit now, though at the time I heard it only as an accusation, not as a warning. What hurt most wasn't the leaving itself, but realizing she had stopped believing I would ever actually change for her or for us. She met someone within the year, a contractor named Trent who fixed her leaking roof and, apparently, several other things I hadn't noticed. I didn't blame her for wanting someone present, someone who came home at 5 instead of drowning in other families' custody disputes nightly. Still, some nights I lay awake replaying every missed dinner, every case file I chose over bedtime stories, wondering if I could have done better. Colleagues on the bench called me twice, urging me to reconsider, said I was one of the fairer judges the county had seen in years. I thanked them, meant it honestly, and still packed my robes into a single cardboard box before the following Monday morning arrived. I resigned from the bench 3 months later, telling almost no one the real reason, only that I wanted something simpler now. I moved Emma and Jack to Millbrook, a small, quiet town where nobody knew a judge's gavel from a carpenter's simple hammer. I bought a rundown workshop on Maple Street and slowly started building furniture by hand, sanding old grief into something quietly useful again. My workshop smelled of pine shavings and varnish, and I kept a small radio tuned to an old country station Renee had never liked. Customers started arriving slowly, first for simple shelves, then for kitchen tables, then eventually for the kind of rocking chairs people keep for decades. Jack liked to sit on an overturned bucket after school, watching sawdust curl off the lathe like something magical happening right in front of him. Emma preferred drawing at the workbench, filling notebooks with sketches of houses that never quite looked like the one we actually lived in. At exactly 7 each morning, before either child was fully awake, I'd start the coffee and lay out 2 mismatched cereal bowls quietly. Some mornings I made grilled cheese and tomato soup for the kids before the yellow school bus rattled loudly down our road. Emma was 10 years old now, sharp and watchful like her mother, but carrying a softness Renee had never quite let herself keep. Jack was 7 years old, missing 2 front teeth, obsessed with dinosaurs, insisting every single bedtime story include at least one somewhere nearby. Our kitchen smelled like sawdust and cinnamon most evenings now, a strange mixture I had grown to love more than I ever expected. On the counter sat a plate of pie under foil, a small gift from Claire, our kind neighbor 2 houses down the road. Claire Whitfield ran the Millbrook Library downtown, wore cardigans the color of autumn leaves, and remembered exactly how Jack liked his cocoa. She had started leaving small things quietly on my porch after Renee left, casseroles, a torn paperback, a note reading, "You're doing fine." I never once asked her to, and she never let it become something bigger than plain kindness, just a steady, quiet presence nearby. Every Saturday, Claire set aside a stack of dinosaur books for Jack before the library even opened, tucked behind the front desk with his name. Emma discovered poetry there, checking out the same battered collection so many times that Claire eventually just let her keep it permanently. I started stopping by on Thursdays, ostensibly returning books, though we both knew the real reason had very little to do with reading. For 2 years, she showed up quietly at school plays, sat 2 rows back, never once acting like she truly belonged there yet. "You don't have to sit way back there," I told her one evening, and she just smiled and said she liked the view. Claire had never been married herself, though she once told me she'd loved someone once who wasn't ready to actually stay in one place. She ran the library like a second living room, letting kids sprawl on beanbags and adults linger longer than any return date allowed. Jack called her the dinosaur lady after she found him 3 separate books on the Triassic period within a single afternoon visit. Emma, more guarded, took longer to warm, but eventually started leaving Claire notes tucked inside returned library books like small quiet secrets. I noticed Claire noticing me back, small things, the careful way she remembered how I took my coffee black, no sugar, ever. Neither of us ever named what was happening, content instead to let it grow slowly, unbothered by any calendar or clock at all. That was Claire, patient as a slow Tuesday afternoon, never pushing, never demanding I notice what was obviously happening between the two of us. The night Trent showed up uninvited, I called Claire right afterward, my voice tighter and thinner than I had meant for it to sound. "He said he's taking the kids away," I told her, and she went quiet for a long, careful moment on the other end. "What did Renee actually say when Trent told her he was planning to fight you for custody of the kids, before any of this happened?" she finally asked. And I admitted I hadn't spoken to Renee directly in almost 8 long, quiet months. I almost canceled the party entirely, worried Trent might show up and ruin Jack's day the way he'd already ruined my quiet evening. Claire talked me out of it gently, reminding me that Jack had been planning his Stegosaurus cake for nearly 3 whole weeks now. "Let him show up if he wants," Claire said. "We'll just keep celebrating your wonderful son today, no matter what he decides to say or do to us." A week before the party, I ran into Trent at the grocery store, both of us reaching for the same discounted rotisserie chicken. "Didn't expect to see a judge doing his own shopping," he said, half smiling, though the words carried an edge I recognized instantly. "I'm not a judge anymore," I said simply, "just a guy buying dinner for his kids," and I moved my cart along calmly. He followed me down the cereal aisle anyway, asking pointed questions about Renee's parenting time, about whether I thought she was truly fit. "That's between Renee and me," I told him evenly, "and honestly, it's not something you get to weigh in on, Trent, ever." He laughed, short and sharp, and said something about how judges always thought they were the only ones who understood fairness or justice. I left without responding further, my chest tight the whole drive home, replaying every word until Claire finally talked me down that evening. "He's testing you," Claire said over the phone, "seeing exactly what makes you flinch and lose your temper, so please don't give him anything at all to work with tonight." I spent that morning inflating balloons in the garage, trying not to imagine every possible version of Trent standing in our driveway again. 2 days later, at Jack's dinosaur-themed birthday party in the small community park, Renee finally arrived with Trent trailing close behind her. She looked thinner than I remembered her, tired around the eyes, clutching her purse like it was the only solid thing left standing. Trent walked straight toward our crowded picnic table, ignoring the balloons, ignoring the children, ignoring every ounce of decency the moment required. "Funny seeing the big shot judge grilling hot dogs in a park," he said loudly, plenty loud enough for other parents to hear. A few nearby mothers turned. Forks paused midair, sensing the sudden shift in air the way small towns always sense trouble slowly brewing. "We're just here for Jack's birthday," I said quietly, trying hard to keep my voice level and calm for my young son's sake. "Cute little life you built for yourself," Trent continued, gesturing broadly at the balloons, at Claire, at our modest folding table of snacks. Claire set down her paper plate slowly, wiped her hands carefully on a napkin, and looked at him with unhurried, steady, patient calm. "It is cute," she said simply, "because it's honest and simple, which might be exactly why it bothers you so very much right now, Trent, more than you'd admit." Trent's jaw twitched hard, and for 1 second, something flickered behind his eyes, something that looked almost like quiet, uncomfortable self-recognition of himself. "Nobody asked you anything," he snapped, and Claire only nodded, unbothered, and said she understood this clearly wasn't really about her at all. "This is about a man who left a whole courtroom behind just to make grilled cheese for his kids every single morning instead of arguing," she added gently, calmly. "You don't know anything about what I gave up," Trent said suddenly, quieter now, almost more to himself than to anyone else nearby. Claire tilted her head, waiting, and for a moment the whole park seemed to hold its breath around the folding picnic table. "I gave up a house, a business, a whole life," Trent continued, "and somehow he still gets the kids, the town, the easy life." "Nobody's life is easy," Claire said gently. "It just looks that way from the outside, especially when someone's finally stopped fighting everyone around them for good, even when it clearly isn't." Renee's face changed then, some old guilt quietly surfacing, the kind 5 whole years hadn't quite managed to fully bury or forget. "Trent, that's enough now, please. Just stop talking before you say something else you'll regret in front of everyone here at Jack's own birthday party," Renee said quietly, tugging his sleeve, her voice smaller than the version I remembered from our old marriage. Renee stayed behind, apologizing quietly to a few of the other parents, her cheeks flushed with an embarrassment I hadn't seen from her in years. "I'm sorry," she said to me directly. "He gets like that sometimes when he's angry, and I honestly don't always know how to stop it once it starts, especially in front of people." I told her it wasn't my job to manage Trent's temper, only to make sure Jack's birthday wasn't ruined by it entirely. He yanked his arm back hard, muttered something about people always taking my side, and stalked off toward the parking lot completely alone. The party slowly resumed, Jack blissfully oblivious, blowing out candles shaped like a stegosaurus while everyone sang slightly off-key together happily. A few other parents glanced my way afterward, half curious, half sympathetic, though nobody said a single word about what had just happened. Claire caught my eye across the table and gave a small, steady nod, the kind that said we'd survived worse things together already. I thought briefly about the old version of myself, the one who might have chased Trent down just to prove a legal point. Instead, I cut another slice of stegosaurus cake and handed it to Jack, who had no idea any of it had even happened. Emma slipped her small hand quietly into mine under the table and whispered that she was glad her dad wasn't loud like that. Later that same night, Claire and I sat together on my porch steps, the kids asleep, crickets loud in the warm summer darkness. "I'm sorry you got dragged into all that," I said, and she shook her head, said she'd walk into worse for far less. "I'm scared sometimes," I admitted, surprising even myself, "that I'll ruin this too, the way things ended before with Renee, somehow, eventually." Claire was quiet for a moment, then said timing had never really been the actual problem between two people who chose to stay. "You didn't ruin your marriage," she said softly. "You just married someone who needed something different, something you simply couldn't keep giving her forever, no matter how hard you tried." I told her about the bench then, the real reason I had quit, the fear I'd become someone my own children didn't recognize anymore. "I was afraid of becoming a man who judged everyone except himself," I said quietly, and Claire took my hand without saying a word. "Do you ever miss being a judge, wearing those robes, deciding every single case that came through your courtroom door, or do you feel relieved?" Claire asked quietly, and I sat with the question longer than I expected to sit with it. "I miss the certainty," I admitted, knowing exactly what the law said even when I couldn't always be sure it was truly right. "Out here," I told her, "there's no clear ruling for grief, no precedent for how long a man should mourn his old life." "Maybe that's the point," Claire said softly. "Some things you just have to feel your own way through, slowly and carefully, without any rule book at all to guide you." She told me about her own quiet losses then, a father who left early, a marriage proposal she'd once gently, carefully turned down herself. "I wasn't ready for it then," she said, "but I think I've truly been ready for this, for you, for quite a long while now, honestly, more than I admitted." Researchers who study families after divorce have generally found that children tend to do noticeably better when parents keep conflict low and steady. I thought about that as Claire squeezed my fingers, about all the old case files where cooperation mattered more than winning ever truly did. "I'm not going anywhere at all," Claire said, "not because I'm endlessly patient, but because I genuinely like the quiet life we're slowly building here together with you." "I love you," I said, the words simple and completely unrehearsed, nothing like the polished courtroom arguments I once wrote for a living. Claire laughed softly, her eyes wet, and said she'd been waiting nearly 2 whole years for me to finally catch up to her. "What about the kids?" I asked quietly. "Are you ready for 2 kids who already lost one version of a family once before?" "I'm not trying to replace anything," Claire said gently. "I just want to add to what's already good here if you'll simply let me try. Honestly, that's all I'm asking." I told her that sounded exactly right, that Emma and Jack deserved someone who added warmth instead of demanding they choose between 2 homes. We sat there a long while, saying nothing more, just listening to the crickets and the small house quietly settling around us in the dark. It would have been easy, in those early days, to let Emma and Jack see only Trent's temper, only his careless, thoughtless words. Easy isn't always right, though, and I'd spent too many years watching bitter parents weaponize their children to ever choose that path myself. I never once tried to turn the kids against Trent, remembering too many families I'd watched shatter themselves over exactly that kind of pettiness. I'd sat on the bench long enough to know that children rarely blame the parent who stayed calm, only the ongoing war itself. So I kept my mouth shut, mostly, and let Emma and Jack form their own quiet opinions about the man in their mother's house. Renee had married Trent barely a year after our divorce finalized, and for a while I told myself it was simply none of my business. Friends in town whispered sometimes about how quickly it had all happened, though I never once let myself repeat any of it aloud. Emma once asked me flatly, over dinner, whether I still loved her mother, and I told her love changes shape, but rarely disappears. Jack worried more quietly, drawing pictures of two houses connected by a single winding road instead of asking any direct questions himself. I framed one of those drawings and hung it in the workshop, a small reminder that children build their own maps of safety. Jack used to ask some nights why Mommy's new house didn't smell like cinnamon, and I never quite knew how to answer him honestly. Emma stopped asking about Trent entirely after the second Christmas, and I noticed but never pushed her gently to explain exactly why. I kept custody arrangements simple and predictable on purpose, remembering every case file where conflict alone had quietly wrecked a child's steady peace. 3 days after the birthday party, Renee called and asked if she could come by, alone, without Trent, to talk honestly for once. She sat at my old kitchen table, the very same one from our marriage, hands wrapped tightly around a mug of coffee she never drank. "Trent's finally gone," she said quietly. "He left right after the park, said I was clearly still in love with my own ex-husband, apparently, and he was right." "Are you?" I asked gently, not unkindly, and Renee laughed a small, broken laugh and slowly shook her head at the kitchen table. "I'm in love with who we could have been together," she said, "not who we actually were, if that even makes any real sense at all to you." I told her honestly that it did, and that I had forgiven the leaving a long time ago, somewhere between grief and grilled cheese sandwiches. "I never really wanted to threaten your custody at all," she admitted. "Trent said it just to scare you, and I quietly let him because I was so angry." "You could have badly hurt the kids," I said honestly. "And that's the one thing I won't quietly let slide, Renee, not ever again." "For what it's worth," Renee added quietly, "the kids talk about Claire like she's always been part of this family, like she was always meant to be here." I told her that meant more than she probably realized, and she smiled. A real one, the first I'd seen from her in years. "You deserve that," she said. "Someone steady and kind. Someone who actually shows up after everything you've already been through with all of us, especially the kids." And for once, neither of us reached for blame or old, tired excuses. We talked a while longer about school schedules, about Jack's dinosaur obsession, about small ordinary things that used to feel impossibly heavy between us. She nodded, eyes down at the table, and said she understood, that she wanted to build something calmer with Emma and Jack going forward. We agreed to keep things simple from now on, predictable pickups, shared holidays, no more surprises showing up uninvited at my front door. Renee stood to leave, then paused at the doorway and said, "You always were fairer than you ever gave yourself credit for, honestly, even back when you were still sitting on that bench every single day, deciding everyone's future." I didn't tell her I had once been a judge who could have easily crushed Trent's threats with a single, well-placed phone call. I didn't need to remind anyone what I used to be, only quietly show them what I had chosen to become instead of that. That evening, Claire and I sat together on the porch again, and I finally asked her the question I'd been circling for months now. "Marry me," I said, no ring yet, no rehearsed speech at all, just Jack's laughter drifting faintly from an open window upstairs somewhere. Claire didn't answer right away, just reached over and rested her head quietly against my shoulder, warm in the thick summer dark. "Ask me properly sometime with an actual ring on one knee," she said, laughing softly. "But yes, obviously yes, you impossible, patient man, always, forever, no matter what happens next." I laughed too, the sound surprising even me, easier and freer than any sound I had made in years since Renee had left us. Emma found us out there a while later, barefoot and half asleep, and asked if Claire was staying over for pancakes in the morning. "Every single morning, if you'll have me here, sweetheart, pancakes and all, for as long as you and your brother want me around, forever if that's all right," Claire told her, and Emma nodded sleepily like that had already been perfectly decided long. Ego. Emma cried a little when we told her, then hugged Claire tightly, and said she'd been hoping for this since almost the very beginning. "I knew," Emma said proudly, "since the pie with the foil actually," and Claire laughed until she had to sit down at the table. We planned a small wedding, nothing like the courthouse ceremony Renee and I once rushed through between two of my crowded court sessions. Claire laughed when I suggested a courthouse ceremony, said she'd waited years for something slower, something with actual flowers and real sunlight. Claire wanted it at the library, under the old oak tree where she'd first noticed me watching her from across the crowded parking lot. I found the ring at a small shop downtown, simple and plain, exactly the kind of thing Claire would actually choose to wear. We told Jack the next day over breakfast, and he mostly wanted to know if Claire's dinosaur knowledge was actually as good as mine. It was, obviously, and within a week Jack had declared Claire an honorary paleontologist of the entire household, complete with a paper certificate. Real love, I have slowly learned, isn't the dramatic entrance or the courtroom victory. It's simply showing up quietly, day after ordinary day. It's grilled cheese at 7, pie under foil, a woman who sits 2 rows back until you finally turn around and truly notice her. It's choosing gentleness in a public park when cruelty walks straight toward your picnic table, loud and uninvited and completely unashamed of itself. It's forgiving the person who left without ever handing them the keys to the piece you slowly, carefully rebuilt without them beside you. 1 year later, Claire wore her grandmother's simple dress on a small lawn behind the Millbrook Library on a golden autumn afternoon. Friends from Maple Street came, along with 2 mothers from Jack's old birthday party, the same ones who had once paused their forks midair. Even a few families I'd once ruled on custody cases for showed up quietly, sending flowers, remembering a fairness they hadn't expected back then. Claire's older brother walked her down the makeshift aisle, past folding chairs and mismatched flowers Emma had picked herself from the library garden. Jack, missing one more tooth by then, insisted on wearing his favorite dinosaur bounty, and nobody argued because some battles aren't worth fighting. Emma read a poem she had written herself, something quiet about houses that slowly become homes when the right people finally choose to stay. Renee came to the wedding, sat near the back, clapped softly when Claire and I kissed, and slipped away before the cake was cut. I watched her go and felt only a small, clean sadness, the kind that no longer asked anything at all of me anymore. Someone had strung string lights between the oak branches, and Jack insisted on a slow dance with Claire before the cake was even served. Emma gave a short toast, her voice shaking only slightly, thanking Claire for choosing a family that wasn't perfect but was undeniably hers. I danced with my new wife under those lights, thinking briefly of a rainy October Tuesday, and feeling only gratitude for how far we'd come. Trent wasn't there, and nobody mentioned him once, not during the toasts, not during the dancing, not even in a passing whisper. Our daughter, Grace, arrived on a quiet Sunday morning, and Jack immediately declared her his personal apprentice paleontologist, whether she liked it or not. Emma held her for hours that first week, humming the same lullaby Claire used to hum quietly at school plays years earlier. Renee sent a small blanket for Grace, handmade, with a note simply saying she was happy for all of us, and I believed her. 2 years after the wedding, our kitchen still smells like sawdust and cinnamon, though now there's a small crib tucked in one corner. Claire still leaves foil-covered pie on porches for other tired parents around town who don't yet know exactly how deeply they're loved. I started mentoring a few local kids on weekends, teaching them basic woodworking, watching them find the same quiet focus I once found. One of them, a boy from a rough divorce himself, told me sanding wood helped more than any counselor's office ever had before. I didn't correct him, only handed him another block of pine and let the workshop do whatever gentle work it needed to do. I still build furniture on Maple Street, though sometimes young lawyers passing through find me and ask why a judge would quit for sawdust. I tell them the plain truth now, that some benches you simply sit on, and some porches you finally learn to stay on instead. Kindness, I tell Jack whenever he asks about Trent, isn't about winning, it's about choosing gentleness, even when cruelty knocks first, loudly, at your door. You can forgive someone completely, and still firmly refuse to hand them your children, your peace, or your quietly rebuilt evenings ever again. Real strength was never truly the gavel or the title, it was learning to open a door without needing to prove anything at all. Some nights I still stand at the sink drying dishes, half expecting a doorbell, and instead I only hear my family quietly laughing nearby. That sound, more than any verdict I ever solemnly handed down, is the only ruling I have ever truly wanted to protect forever. Sometimes I think about the version of me who stayed on the bench, who never learned to build anything with his own 2 hands. I don't envy him, not anymore, though I understand now why he clung so tightly to rulings, to certainty, to anything that felt controllable. Claire teases me sometimes that I still argue like a courtroom lawyer, especially when Jack insists dinosaurs and dragons are somehow the same thing. We settle most disputes with pancakes now instead of verdicts, which Claire insists is a far more effective system than anything I ever presided over. Emma wants to study law herself someday, though she says she'd rather help families stay together than decide who gets to keep what. I told her that sounded like the best kind of justice there was, the quiet, unglamorous kind nobody ever puts on television. Jack still believes, at 9, that dinosaurs and second chances are somehow related, and honestly, some days I'm not entirely sure he's wrong. Claire says love isn't a courtroom, that nobody needs to win, they just need to keep showing up long after the applause fades away. Grace is 2 now, chasing after Jack's dinosaur figurines across the workshop floor while sawdust settles gently in her fine, dark hair. Trent moved out of state eventually, and Renee mentioned once that he'd started fresh somewhere quieter, away from anyone who remembered that park. Some evenings, the whole family gathers on the porch, the same porch where a doorbell once rang at exactly 6:40, changing everything. I still keep that dish towel from that night folded in a kitchen drawer, a small, strange reminder of how far we've traveled. Claire says I'm sentimental about the oddest things, and I tell her a man who once judged families for a living earned that right. Emma is 12 now, taller than Claire already, and still writes poems about houses becoming homes when the right people finally decide to stay. Jack is 9, still obsessed with dinosaurs, though now he insists our new baby sister will grow up loving them too, obviously. Renee eventually moved to a smaller apartment across town, closer to her sister, and started taking evening classes toward a nursing degree. She told me once that helping strangers heal felt more honest than anything Trent had ever offered her during their short, difficult marriage. I was glad for her, genuinely, in a way that surprised me. The old resentment finally worn smooth like Riverstone over time. Studies on remarriage and blended families suggest that respectful co-parenting, more than any single custody arrangement, predicts how children eventually feel about both parents. I believed that long before I read it anywhere, watching Emma and Jack move easily between two homes that no longer competed for their loyalty. Renee came to Jack's 9th birthday too, sat beside Claire this time, and the two of them argued cheerfully over frosting recipes for an hour. It wasn't the ending I imagined back when she first walked out on that rainy October Tuesday, but it was, somehow, a good one. Renee sends birthday cards every year, small and simple, and I make sure the kids know their mother still genuinely loves them deeply. I used to think justice was something handed down from a bench, a decision made once, and then simply enforced by others. Now I think justice looks more like a porch light left on, a plate of pie under foil, a door opened without fear. Trent, wherever he ended up, taught me something too, that cruelty usually comes from someone quietly grieving a life he never actually built. I hope he found his own version of Maple Street eventually, some quiet workshop where old bitterness slowly gets sanded down over time. Claire tells me I still think like a judge sometimes, weighing every apology, every gesture, searching for the fairest possible ruling available. Maybe that's fine, she says, as long as the final verdict always leans generously toward grace instead of quietly toward old grievance. Forgiveness, it turns out, was never about pretending the hurt didn't happen, only about refusing to let it quietly run my whole life. Thank you for spending your time with Heartline Stories Truth today, wherever it is you happen to be watching from right now. If this story stayed with you today, please subscribe for more original stories about family, resilience, forgiveness, and quiet, hard-won second chances.